Newthoughtmedia Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. Newthoughtmedia Network. Positively inspiring.
Newthoughtmedia Network proudly presents Lindsay Leimbach, Practicing Infinite Possibilities, Fridays at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. Here's Lindsay.
Hey, good morning from California. So it's 9 o'clock here. And if you're watching me on the East Coast, it's 12 o'clock. So the East Coast is having lunch with me, and I'm very grateful. And the West Coast is having coffee. So welcome to PIP, Practicing Infinite Possibilities. Wow, how do we do that? That's why I've come here. I love New Thought Network, and I want to really thank them for giving this ability and this platform where we can learn a little bit more about our brain and about our own science going on. Hey, Bonnie. Hey, Rev Melissa. Thanks for showing up. I really appreciate it. I really do. Last week was episode 1. Can you even believe it was episode 1, my very first one? And so now we're on episode 2. And last week we talked about the brain, and I really want to review that because whatever you're practicing, whatever you're bringing into your mind, you want to make sure that it gets in there deep into the subconscious mind so you really understand it so you can know how your brain works. So I'm going to have Rev Robert, who is my producer, and I am so grateful is here and helping me put up, there it is, the brain screen again. You guys, some of you guys will remember this from last week. If anything, I'd almost take out your phone and take a picture of this because this is so important for you to understand. You want to understand that all human people have this brain, and it has 3 sections. It has the lower section in it, and this is the Reader's Digest version. That is really true. But it has the lower section. The lower section is really that automatic pilot that we have. It regulates your heart. It allows your breathing to go on. It's always digesting. While you're sleeping, it's on. If it is not working, then you are not here. Now let's go back to the slide one more time, because I want to go to the middle brain. Now, the middle brain stores all your memories. So when we're talking about subconscious mind, when we're saying it in the scientific field, meaning the memories that you have stored, that you have based on your past, it's in there. And human beings and animals have that. Dogs have it. Horses have it. Incredible. All animals can remember things, right? From the past. My dogs from the pound, they remember some trauma. And when I got them, they still had that in that mind. How you love, how you accept, how you care, how that you learn to do that, how you grieve, is all in that subconscious memory bank of a mind. So think of it as a sponge. And then, of course, we have the higher level. Now, the higher level is your executive thinking. And Rev Melissa, she has a terrific book called, she's been talking about play. And play often is done in the middle and the higher part, the executive thinking. It's where you problem solve, right? Where you can play chess, where you can override past thoughts. In Science of Mind, or in New Thought, or in all spirituality, what we're saying is we don't have to be ruled by our past. We are not our past. Let me say this one more time. You are not your past. Your past is in your mind. And when you're a little kid, you absorb so many ideas, but they're other people's ideas. They're ideas from your family, from your culture, right? From the world as a large, from your religion. from your Girl Scout or Boy Scout troop, wherever, from your neighborhood friends, those ideas get planted and you're not quite sure. You just take them on as truth. But when you're older, you get to evaluate those truths, those things from the past, and you get to decide, are these the things I want to have in my life? Is this how I want to process? If you grew up in a family that's screaming and yelling, you take that on. And then all of a sudden you have your own family and you're screaming and yelling. And you're like, where is this coming from? But that's because you have pathways of the past in this part of your mind. And you're just going back to old ways, old habits, right? So what we want to be able to is do the reprogramming. So let me take this a little bit even further. And I want Rev Robert to put up the slide of the snow, because this is where there you go. I want you guys to keep this one up for a little bit. I want you guys to think of your brain as snow. Okay, think of it as just a clear white field of 4-foot snow. And when you have to get to one idea to another, like let's say if we're learning how to play the piano, the first time you get on the piano, it's hard. You don't know where the keys are. You haven't learned it. The brain has not made pathways yet. But with the snow, it's like trying to go through from one end of a field to another end. It's like you're going through and it's really deep and it's really hard to get there. So circle back to me a little bit so I can back to my picture. We're working all this out. There you go. In the future, I'm going to try to have us both at the same time because I want you guys to really see this. In your mind's eye, imagine as you're going through snow. The first time you go through a field of snow, it's extremely hard. The first time you sit down to play the piano, it's extremely hard. Okay. But the second time you sit down to play the piano, your brain has already made some pathways, some neurons have started to connect. This is how you learn. They start to connect together. And you're like, this isn't so hard. I can kind of remember how to do this. Now, go back if you don't have to change the slide, but if you think about the snow again, if you're stepping in your same footsteps again, it's easier the second time. It's still difficult, but it's easier because you've started to make a pathway, right? Can you see this? Now, if I sit down and I play the piano another day, the neurons are saying, wait a second, there's a pathway being formed here. I know how to do this. And they start connecting it together and it becomes easier and easier and easier. And when you're going through the snow, if you start going down the same pathway, the same footsteps, sooner or later, the pathway becomes very big and you can run right through that snow, right? There is no problem. That is exactly what happens, really, exactly what happens in your brain. As you practice something, the brain says, oh, we're going to connect all these neurons together and we're going to make this pathway. It's going to get easier and easier. And then you get to learn a new skill. You think that's terrific, Lindsay. You mean it's that easy? And with human beings, we can do it. They're finding out for our entire lifetime. So how do you make those new pathways? Well, if you think about the brain, remember I said the lower, the middle, and the higher brain. It's the higher brain you have to bring in the information. And the brain has to be important to you. You want to learn it, okay? You want to be part of it, or you have an emotional connection to it. And if you feel that it's something that you're going to bring in and pay attention to, then it goes into the subconscious mind. It goes into that middle part of the brain, and it becomes part of who you are. Now, let's go back to what we were talking about with emotions. If your parents or your culture taught you to be very fearful, let's say, oh, don't go outside, people are going to hurt you. You can't take the bus, whatever it is, that you can't spend the night at someone's house. And they start setting in these concepts of fear at a very young age. They're building pathways, neuronic pathways. You're cultivating these pathways in your brain and you still have them in there. So then as an adult, you're like, man, I'm really kind of scared about this stuff. Where is that coming from? Why is my neighbor not scared at all and I'm scared? Because the pathways, remember the snow pathways were built differently. This is why your past does become part of your present moment if you don't make a choice. Your past doesn't have to doesn't have to be your present moment. Dictate, that's the word I was trying to say. I was saying dictate your present moment. Your present moment can be created mindfully. Mindfully means in the present moment without judgment. Judgment is those past stories. Okay? Now, if you can put up the banner of breathe, that would be of ABC of PIP. This is something that we're going to talk about every time. So how do you make new pathways? How do you not be dictated by your past history? How do you tap into the infinite possibilities of what you can create? Because God or the universal energy or whatever you want to call it gives you the power of choice. Gives you a power to rewire your brain. Your brain is just a tool. It's just a tool, but we need to know how to program it like a computer, or you could say play it like a piano, whatever way. It's a tool, but we have this free will, this universal energy where we get to tap into it and say, I am not going to be living the past in the present moment. I'm going to do my ABCs of PIP. I'm going to become aware. That's the mindfulness. Aware of what's going on. So if you start getting fearful or you start getting upset, if you start getting judgmental, if you start saying, I'm not good enough, you're aware that that's arising. Then you take a breath. You take a breath. And when you take that breath in and you release longer, you're activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So you're bringing your body down to a level where you can tap into right here, right into the higher cortex, to the power of choice, to the higher brain, where you get to connect your brain and your heart together, and you can really feel what you want to create. And while you make that choice, that means you can either choose to continue what you're doing, or you can choose to think different. You can choose to create a different reality in the present moment. Do I really need to be upset? Do I really need to be right? Do I really need to have this fear? That's when you're tapping into the power of God that God gave you. I can't tell you why the human brain allows us to have a feeling, observe the feeling, and then choose a different feeling. To me, that's universal energy. That is the power of prayer. That is the power of God all coming through us. But the person responsible to do it is me. It's me. And if I don't choose something different, then what I'm doing is saying I'm choosing the same thought or the same action, even if I'm wishing for a different result. Einstein said that. He said you cannot have the same kind of thinking and expecting a different result. So this is where we have to have that power of choice. But before we have the power of choice, it's so important you understand that you have the ABCs of PIP, which is the ABCs of infinite possibilities, right? Of practicing infinite possibilities, the awareness. You have to be aware that you have this ability, that you can stop, that you can take a breath, and that you can pivot to what you want, create what you want, instead of creating the past or reliving the past, right? Staying in what you don't want. So let's go and really dive into that. With neuroplasticity, which is the capability of you being able to have your brain grow. Neuroplasticity means that your brain is always learning and it's always growing. And when you take that responsibility, it is so exciting. You're saying, I can do this differently. I can allow to tap into love instead of hate. When you start doing that, then you're actually taking responsibility on what you're programming in your brain. So let me ask you this. How many people have ridden a bike recently? Think about it. I have not ridden a bike in like 10 years, not a real bike. So a stationary bike doesn't count, but I mean out there on a real bike, pedaling around. So I think about it. I was a really good bike rider in my 20s. And then when I was a little girl, I loved riding my bike and all that. So in my brain, I know how to ride my bike. Now, if you put me on a bike right now, and I'm 55 and proud of it, right? 55, I would get on and I'd be wobbly, right? I'd be wobbly. I would not really know how to ride my bike because my body has changed so much and my brain has kind of forgotten how to ride a bike. But you give me about 10 minutes and I'll bet you anything, I would be like, woo! I'd be riding again. I probably could even put my hands up and be cheering along. You say, how did you do that, Lindsay? You haven't ridden a bike in 30 years. Well, with neuroplasticity, and this is very important for you guys to understand, that when you don't use it, people say you lose it. Well, to some point you do lose it, but really what happens is it's more like it goes into shadow. It goes for human beings, it goes into the shadow state, meaning that think of the pathway in the snow. You don't go down that pathway in the snow and a new snowstorm comes in, it's buried. But it's easy to dig it out. Okay, it's easy to dig it out if it's new snow. It's easy to wake up past neuro connections if you haven't used them, if you take the effort to do it. You think that's great. This is why I can ride a bike again within 10 minutes. But it's also the reason why I can't smoke a cigarette. Yeah, okay, I know. I don't smoke now, but I grew up in the 80s and I thought I was Madonna and I had the long fingernails and the cigarettes and the big hair. I think we all can sit back and remember. I don't know. If you're not from the 80s, you don't remember. But I had my cigarettes and I loved them. I'm sorry, I did. I had them with my friends and we drank coffee or we had beers and Diet Coke and we all sat around and smoked together. It was a very social thing. Okay. That's the reality of it. I enjoyed smoking when I was younger. Then when I got older, I realized this is not going to work for me. It's not something that's healthy for me. I'm having children. I don't want to be smoking. We all know the reasons why we don't smoke. For health reasons, I gave up smoking. But you say, well, Lindsay, that habit then is gone. It's not really that gone. It's buried. It's buried. And I have the ability to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to allow the snow to fill that in. And I don't have cravings for cigarettes at all anymore. Maybe sometimes when like some song came on that's from the 80s and I have kind of one of those flashbacks, I'm like, I remember smoking, but I'm not going to go get a cigarette. But if I went and did get a cigarette and I took a puff, I'd cough my brains out for a while. But probably by the second cigarette, my body would say, yep, this is a habit you like. And I'd be right back at it. So it's very important that you realize that you're the person who has control and that your brain is actually an instrument that you're going to be using all the time. All the time. And you're creating new pathways. You're letting snow go into some old pathways that aren't serving you anymore. And you have to be careful that you don't, when you go back to old pathways, you can dig them up pretty fast. Now, a lot of you guys know I do some coaching, and I don't do some, I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, mindful living coaching. And I have people who come to me and they have what I would call a worried mind. And they're beside themselves that they have this worried mind. What do? I'm always chronically worried about someone, and it's because I love them and I want everyone to be happy and so forth. And I explained to them how the brain works. And I explained somewhere in your life, you took on as worry as a tool to bring you somehow some kind of pleasure. If you worry enough, things will change kind of attitude. Or you witnessed it with your parents, they worried so much, and so it was just normal to worry. It was reinforced to worry. You were part of a culture of worrying. Many ways people might get the worried mind. But once I've now explained that the tool of the brain with neuroplasticity, the more you worry, what do you become? A better worrier. Sorry. The more you're angry, what do you become? You become more angry. The more you're frustrated, what do you become? More frustrated. The brain doesn't say you're worried, so we're going to solve the problem. They'll say, oh, this is what you want to do. And it reinforces those neuroconnections. So what we have to do is allow ourselves, don't get upset by it, because you have to realize this is habitual thinking in your subconscious mind. You have to give yourself some space, right? An alternative pathway. It doesn't say stop worrying. If you're going to stop worrying, you've got to replace it with something else, with prayer, with a mantra, with a belief system that the universal God, as we know it, can handle that situation, and we start creating a new situation. We have to start reprogramming our mind. So mindfulness, once again, is being in the present moment without judgment. It's so important it's without judgment, because let's say we're working with a worried mind, okay? So all of a sudden you're like, okay, I don't want to be worried. I'm working with Lindsay or whoever you're working with. And all of a sudden it comes to you and you go, oh my God, now I'm worried. Now I'm worried. Or I'm angry. And you can just see how that loop keeps reinforcing you doing the same thing over and over again. And you're wondering why you're not getting the different results. So we need to break that loop. And the first way is to give yourself a break and say, okay, ABCs of PIP. Remember ABCs of PIP? Being aware of what you're doing. There it is. Being aware, taking a breath, relaxing, and then giving yourself the choice, making the choice that, hey, I'm proud of myself that I'm aware I'm doing it. So now I can choose something different. All right. I want to tell you one quick thing before we leave is about Rev Melissa, who is watching me today. Shout out to her. I love her. She's the one who introduced me to Rev Robert and got me on New Thought Network. I'm so grateful. Also, she introduced me to this book, Play. This is a really good book. So this book is about how play shapes the brain, opens the imagination, and invigorates the soul. Got it? Invigorates soul. Excellent book. Yeah, I love you too, girlfriend. And so in this book, she talked about this wonderful aspect about sea squirts. So I want to tell you real quick about sea squirts, because it just blew my mind, and it was just such an example of what we're talking about at a real primitive level. I have a little slide of what a sea squirt is. There it is. Okay. Let me see if I can. In a sea squirt, its primitive nervous system makes it more closely related to a human than to a sponge or coral it resembles. Scientists say sea squirt tadpoles approximately are what human ancestors looked like. Get this, 550 million years ago. That's kind of what we looked like 550 million years ago. Evolution is awesome, right? So awesome. So it goes on and it says what a sea squirt has. It has a really primitive nervous system within it when it's born as a baby and it's floating around. And in this primitive nervous system, it's able to go and detect what is dangerous and what is food and good. And the nervous system is allowing it to move away from danger and into food and good. Well, that is exactly when I was talking about our lower brain. That's what our lower brain does. We have this fight, flight, freeze response. We don't even have to think about it. If we see a frisbee coming, we duck and put up our hand. We know that that's dangerous. We learn very quickly that no, that's not it. If something's flashing in front of our baby's eyes, they pull back. We have this nervous system just like the sea squirt, which is so cool. And so then also in our nervous system, we also, in our brain, when something is good, we lean into it. I want more candy. It's like why I like potato chips, but I choose not to eat them, but they taste good, right? So I go to what is good, and I have the power of making choice. Anyway, as I digress, back to the sea squirt. So then what happens to the sea squirt is that when it becomes an adult and it's already done all this moving around and choosing where to go and how to handle the situation, it puts itself on a rock or on a pillar or something like that. And it decides I'm big enough and I can get the nutrients from the water going. Okay. So I don't need to move again. And once it does this and it never moves again, it doesn't have to make that choice, that real primitive choice away from things that'll harm it to something that'll feed it. It doesn't make that choice. And then it actually digests its own nervous system. It becomes a couch potato. Now, of course, that's not exactly like neuroplasticity, because I already told you in the human brain that we actually kind of, when we don't do stuff with our brain, it doesn't totally disappear, but it does kind of go away. And then we have to bring it back out if we want. And you do have to understand the sea squirt is the same in that when it isn't using it and doesn't need it, the brain, it lets it go. The brain wants to make the easiest pathway it can. And it's going to go down the fastest, easiest pathway, like going through the snow. It does not want to go through deep steps to learn something new. You have to play it. You have to practice it. And that's why this is practicing infinite possibilities. You have to practice using your brain to be aware, take a breath, and then make a choice. Make a choice at a higher level of consciousness. Get away from the ego consciousness into the mystic consciousness. And that's what Wayne Dyer talks about. Lots of people talk about the lower level of thinking to the higher level of thinking. We get to choose, but it takes energy. So you need to keep practicing, playing, using your brain to develop the higher level. So next week, I'm going to talk about vitamin G, and I'm also going to talk about how we use our brain and how we can use mindfulness and actually develop a higher level of consciousness while driving. I'm not kidding, while driving your car. That is what I'm going to talk about. So for this week, everybody keep doing the ABCs of PIP. Being aware, breathe, and make a higher level of consciousness because you are wiring and playing your brain. And I want to thank so much to the network. And I'm just filled with gratitude that so many of you guys showed up. And remember, you can always get in touch with me through centeredmoment.com or at Gmail. And I have an upcoming class in August that's on Zoom. And I can tell you more about that if you want to reach out. It's the Neurodharma, and it's really based on Rick Hanson's work, who is a neuropsychologist out of Berkeley. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Love to you all.